Today, I'm joined by Jack Posobeic to go through some of the biggest stories in the news. Jack, thank you for joining me again.
Stephen, always a pleasure. Congrats, by the way, on the new studio, the new backdrop. It's looking great, man. I love it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I tried to connect with you at the Charlie Kirk event, but my goodness, you had a line of people wanting to take photos, shake your hand. So I guess I just have to wait to get you back on the show, huh?
No, don't worry about it. We'll get you to the front of the line. We'll have someone send you a copy of Unhumans. Maybe I'll get you a signed copy or something. Don't worry for your troubles. No, no, thank you. No, those events are incredible, and Charlie brings out such a great crowd, and America Fest being what it was, and of course it was the first and only at the time rally that President Trump did, or even public speech that he did after winning the election, but before becoming president himself. And so, it was just really great to be able to be there in Arizona. Of course, Arizona having been one of the states that flipped for him in that swing state, really because of the work of Charlie Kirk and Turning Point Action and so much stuff that they did. And, look, I've just been going out there and warning people about the rise of Marxism in our country, which is ongoing, by the way. And people, what can I say? I've been talking with you for almost a year about it, and yet people still come up to me every day. They say, Jack, what you said about Marxism, that book Unhumans, it's predicted. It's predicted everything that we're seeing. And in fact, the left, They've not, accepted defeat and said, oh, well, maybe we should rework our policies and maybe we should try to come more in line with the country. No, they're doubling down and they're supporting Luigi Maggioni.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. If we have time, I want to get into that.
But that's what we predicted. That's exactly what we said they would do.
Yeah. Okay. One thing that is bothering me, one thing that's bothering my audience is Attorney General Pam Bondi. After Matt Gaetz was removed, she was put in as a bulldog, all this experience. I still think she's great, but many see her now more like a post-White House Fox News contributor versus the head of the Department of Justice. What are your thoughts on her? Are we going to see arrests? Are we going to see this criminal referral about Andrew Cuomo go somewhere? This potential criminal referral of Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York? Are we ever going to see the actual names on the Jeffrey Epstein list? Your thoughts?
Well, I think those are all things that people should be asking for, and I think people have a right to ask for them. By the way, I completely support these criminal referrals, and when you look at people like Bill Pulte, who pulled those files, those mortgage files from the housing department, and was able to actually pull Letitia James, I say, Bill, I got a whole list of mortgages that you should be looking into. By the way, it's not just Letitia James. Let's go down the whole list. But clearly, this is what people want. People want reciprocity. And in the book I was just talking about, I said, this is exactly what you want. And you want to make sure that you're careful with your reciprocity. It has to be what we called exact reciprocity. And so Letitia James, perfect example. You want to actually go after someone who, and when I say go after a quote unquote, what I mean is you deliver to them that which they delivered to us. So we saw Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, Fannie Willis, all the rest of them throughout the country, and all of the lawfare that was done to President Trump, the lawfare that was done to the J6ers, the things that Merrick Garland did throughout the DOJ. And so this is, by the way, talk about due process rights, people who didn't have their due process rights held up for years in many cases, who were actual American citizens, were the J6ers. And so when the media comes to me and says, oh, what about the due process rights of the illegal aliens? I say, what due process rights? They're not citizens. Citizenship means something. It's supposed to, but it doesn't if you are, of course, a Trump supporter or a conservative. And so when the Democrats were in power, particularly under Joe Biden this last time around, this go-around, if you were someone who said you didn't believe in the COVID vaccine, well, guess what? You could be demonetized, you could be debanked, you could have your free speech rights taken away, and in some egregious cases, you could lose your job or even be kicked out of the military, as we saw happen to thousands and thousands of people. We saw so many patriots arrested for just praying out front of an abortion clinic, or, like myself, being someone who attends the Latin Mass, you would have the FBI coming after you. Or if you were someone who just participated in a peaceful protest on January 6th and maybe didn't even go into the Capitol, suddenly you found yourself facing charges. And the Democrats, you see, and this is what would be my message to the administration on this, is the Democrats have created this precedent where they didn't need to hope for, mass arrests. They didn't need to hope for the arrest of President Trump. They did all those things. They saw all those things, and they saw for years how Rachel Maddow and Jake Tapper and Norm Eisen and all the rest of this coterie of comrades were putting this up and putting this all behind them. And so it actually happened. And so anyone on the conservative side or anyone in just really the middle wants is justice. We're not talking about revenge. We're talking about justice. And what does justice mean? You balance the scales. And right now, people aren't feeling it.
Yeah, they're not, especially when there is evidence. So, for example, the Letitia James, it's pretty much looking like she changed the value of her properties to get better loans or additional loans. She took out a mortgage with her father as if she was the wife. She said her her rental is 5 units and then changed it to 4 to get a better loan rate. She said her primary residence is in Virginia. Like, she went after Trump for real estate related fraud, and she's the one allegedly committing the fraud. I just think whether she's guilty or not, she should be investigated and given her day in court.
And look, this is what you saw happen to so many people, that her organization is her Attorney General's office. What she's done is she would launch investigations into groups, into conservative and right wing and anti-immigration groups, and say, we're going to open an investigation into you, not tell them what it was for, not actually tell them what it was about. But she would say, we've opened an investigation. You need to respond to our subpoena. So imagine if I'm sitting there and I'm just doing my show every day, and all of a sudden I get in the mail a subpoena from Letitia James's office, and it says, your show is now under investigation. You must respond to this subpoena. Here are the documents. Here's the judge that signed off on it. And if you don't respond, you will be held in contempt of court. And guess what? That all creates a financial drain. I mean, we have insurance, we have all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, it creates financial drain and a time drain. That's what she did to the NRA. She went after them with the full force of the government of the state of New York, and then she began doing it to other organizations across the country, and she would be continuing to do it until she was stopped. That's what people need to understand, and I would say this to anyone on the conservative side, is you need to understand that these people don't care about they'll say, oh, it's a double standard, you're pointing out the hypocrisy. They don't care about you pointing out their hypocrisy. They want to win, and they want to see you financially and legally crushed by any means at their disposal, and they will do so and continue to do so. So I certainly hope in this egregious case of a bad actor like Letitia James, that is someone who hopefully can be stopped by this, but you need to go absolutely further. You need to continue this, and up to the point where if she resigns or, potentially, as you say, is even in court herself, this will not stop until we start getting some of these across the finish line.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of these Democrats, you can point out their shame, you can point out their fraud, their hypocrisy. It bounces off like rubber bullets. It's so weird. Speaking of lawsuits, I saw this.
Stephen, the reason that is because they don't view us as being, they view us as second-class citizens. So we are peasants and they are the elites. So if we're a peasant, who cares what the peasant thinks?
Yeah. This caught my attention because on my show, I've covered this several times. I believe that Act Blue is not acting above board. I believe that they are bringing foreign money into the country. James O'Keefe has done an excellent job of knocking doors and finding hundreds of people that are like, no, I never donated this. Well, now President Trump will be signing an order cracking down on Act Blue. This is according to Politico. Act Blue is nothing more than a money laundering platform for the Democrat Party full of fraud. What are your thoughts on Act Blue? What are your thoughts on them now cracking down on this?
Look, I think there's a lot of foreign money in American politics, and I think Act Blue represents a really easy way to get it in. Now, I guess I would caution some folks to understand that, by the way, there are liberals who do donate like this to Act Blue, because keep in mind, right? You have to construct your model of a liberal, of the liberal mind, which is hard to do. I understand, but you have to try to do it. So imagine you're sitting there watching MSNBC every day and actually believing the things that you're being told. Like, you actually believe that Donald Trump is a Russian agent, that he's a white supremacist, that he's all these things. And here's the person who's coming on. Maybe his name's Adam Schiff, maybe his name's Eric Swalwell. And this person says, if you donate to my campaign, then I will stop the Russians from taking over the country. And remember, in this example, you actually believe all those things. Well, of course, the first thing you do is you pull out your phone and you say, oh my gosh, how much money can I do? I've got to get in there. I've got to get in there. And by the way, I'm sure if you have any liberals in your life, like I have a neighbor who's kind of like this, you know that's exactly how they are. They are rabid supporters, and they absolutely will be donating every time they see someone on TV. So when you look at the MSNBC, the CNN model of this, of outrage marketing, that's exactly what they're doing. It is a business model for the Democrats. That's step one. Then step two is, as you say, and as James O'Keefe has documented, there are those people that are suddenly saying, wait a minute, okay, look, these patterns don't make any sense. These patterns of donations, this isn't recurring. Like we all know about recurring donations, recurring subscriptions. That's sort of the world we live in now. By the way, I hope everyone is a recurring subscriber to Stephen Gardner, and everything that he's got out. But the idea is that we know what those patterns look like. It's generally once a month, and there's a certain fee. It's a flat fee. But then when you go into these Act Blue situations, that's not what we're seeing. That is a completely different pattern of donations, pattern of life that doesn't exist anywhere else, in nature. And so the question is, how could it be $50 here and then $150 here and then $1,000 there? And it's so many times the frequency within a 24-hour period that it just doesn't make sense with a person's pattern of life. It's like they're sitting there donating to Act Blue all day. No, it makes no sense. What it does make more sense with is a classic example of money laundering, and doing so to keep your donation level under that $10,000 threshold, so that the Treasury Department doesn't open up a suspicious financial transaction on you, because suddenly donations are going to be bigger. They're not going to see that amount of money being traveled around, so they're not going to get the wire trafficking report because of it. So if that is the case, then that's exactly what you'd want to be looking for. And I say this as I wasn't a financial analyst when I was in the intel community, but I've worked with those guys in the past, and that's exactly the type of things that they look for when they are doing money laundering investigations.
Well, I mean, that's how they caught Hunter Biden. Over 150 SARS reports, suspicious activity reports. Of course, back then, Janet Yellen, she just turned a blind eye to it. But Besant, he wouldn't do that. But the thing I like about the Act Blue situation is, Hunter Biden being paid from a mayor's wife in Russia with diamonds, a little bit harder to track. With Act Blue, there's thousands of paper trails that you can go down. Okay, this donation, this person says no, let's follow that back. I think that they're going to find a massive money laundering scheme, and I'm just here for it. I want them to crack it open and show us behind the curtain.
Look, and if you're able to track that, and by the way, this goes beyond just Act Blue itself, because okay, let's say somebody is donating, and let's say there is someone who's doing it, that could be a Smurf. So you have people who are U.S. citizens that are then taking money from a foreign state actor, and that foreign actor gives the money to the U.S. citizen. The U.S. citizen opens up an Act Blue account. The money goes in, and suddenly it looks like the donation is coming from a U.S. citizen, and on paper it is. But if you're actually tracking the money back, you would then find that the ultimate source of the money was foreign, whether it's the Middle East or China or whatever out there in the world that's being pumped in to influence these elections. And clearly, this is something that's been going on for a long time. In the Washington, D.C. area, there is foreign money absolutely everywhere. And so what I really hope is that this investigation, Act Blue, of course, but it broadens out to all politics in all of Washington, D.C., because we absolutely need to track where this money is coming from. By the way, this is something that DOJ was going into when they targeted USAID, because a lot of these NGOs that are taking in money from USAID were also taking money from foreign sources. Then they were generating reports that were commingling funds, and those reports would then be turned around and used by the FBI or even the intelligence community to determine their objectives and priorities. So suddenly you're getting foreign money actually directing our national security state. This is a huge problem. It's a much bigger issue than just ActBlue, and I really do think that ActBlue is just the tip of the iceberg.
Losing weight can feel like an uphill battle, especially with the American diet. From nasty seed oils that hurt us to high fructose corn syrup that makes us even more hungry. Americans have wrecked their gut health. That's where Thermotrim steps in as a smart, science-backed solution. This USA-made fat burner starts by restoring your gut health. Thermotrim has a gut bacteria found in thinner people, but not heavier Americans. Thermotrim helps restore that so you can lose weight. It supports digestion and curbs cravings naturally. Have you tried other products to lose weight and change your gut health? I know I have. For me, Thermotrim is what my body needed. Get Thermotrim to improve your gut health and start losing weight today. Visit redlineremedies.com or snap the QR code. Make sure to use code Gardner to get an additional 20% off. We all feel better when we lose weight, and I want you to live a long and happy life. Yeah, I do too. My very first thought was we need Pam Bondi on this. My second thought was we need DOJ. I did just notice something here. Again, this is coming from Politico, but it does say AG Bondi will reportedly be involved in this one. So that's a good sign. Hopefully, we can definitely get to the bottom of that. Another thing that I wanted to go over with you is, the media would have you believe that conservatives are these heartless people that want to kick immigrants out of the country, that they have a right to be here. But the reality is they don't have a right to be here. They've come into the country. Yes, they had a golden carrot that was dangled by Alejandro Mayorkas and Joe Biden. But now, according to new reports from Pew Research, 97% of Americans say we absolutely want these criminals out of our country. And over 90% of Democrats said that they agreed. So that kind of shocked me, because the media would have you believe that the Democrats want to keep every single illegal immigrant. Is this the voter base not having the same thoughts and ideology as the leadership base in the Democrat Party?
Well, I think what's really going on is, yes, to an extent, of course, the leadership in the Democrat Party has gotten rich and fat and happy from donations from these types of organizations and others for allowing the open borders to be open. And there's an entire archipelago of NGOs that are benefiting from taxpayer dollars, and more, or at least were up until very recently, in allowing the flow of illegal aliens into this country. Illegal immigration is a big business, and the more it's a business for the cartels, and it's a business for the NGOs, and it's a business for Democrats. And of course, ultimately, what does it do? It allows for the Democrats to be able to put these illegals into blue areas and then inflate their numbers. And Elon Musk and everyone have talked about this, so that they end up getting more congressional power, because the illegal aliens are counted on the census, and the census is then used to determine the apportionment of congressional seats in the country. So it's an operation. It's an operation that's absolutely being done. The media would sit there and tell you, oh, these are just organic migration flows. No, it's actually very hard to bring someone into this country illegally and then sustain them to be able to be here. There are shelters, and there are all sorts of movement and traveling. How does somebody get from Texas to New York? And how does somebody get from Guatemala all the way up to Maryland, or El Salvador to Maryland, as we saw in this recent case? And so people ask, how is that all done? Because there's an industry industry behind this. There's infrastructure behind this. And so when you turn around and say, well, how is it something like we've seen so many times in the past where the American people, it's a 90-10 issue. 90-10. And by the way, this is talking about criminal illegal aliens, but the administration is certainly they're focusing on the worst go first. But President Trump has said a number of times that he wants to potentially even allow for, maybe a one-time payment of we will pay your plane ticket. We will pay your plane ticket to get you out of this country. We're willing to go down that road, but keep in mind that eventually it will become too expensive for you to be here. It will become untenable for you to be here. Your life here will not be the way that it is. So he is urging the illegals that are here to self-deport before it comes to the point where ICE, where CBP, where HSI, or any of the other related organizations is knocking on your door.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I mean, like they were getting $700 a night luxury hotels plus free meals plus cash in New York. That's flying somebody back home has got to be cheaper than all of that. And then you don't have that ongoing cost that the American taxpayer is carrying. Speaking of the American taxpayer, Charlie Kirk just put out that the Democrat Party just blocked tax cuts on overtime, tips, and Social Security. And he's reminding people, don't forget this. A lot of the people that watch me, they're younger, they're excited about politics, but many of them, they're over the age of 50, and they're now being told, wait a minute, we've got a president that wants to end taxing Social Security, overtime, tips, but the Democrats, they're not having it. They want those tax dollars. Is that so that they can continue doing money laundering to keep themselves in power and keep funneling money to their wives and their children through USAID? Why wouldn't they want to give the American people a tax break?
Well, of course, they don't want to give President Trump the win as well. So they know that they have the ability to obstruct pieces of legislation, and tax policy being one of them. So it's not so much that they don't want to allow it or that they want to continue these taxes, that they don't want to give President Trump the credit for actually having a good idea, which widely popular idea. Doge, by the way, is also a popular idea, unless you're someone who's in, in the industry. Washington, D.C. it's an industry town. It's a one industry town, and that industry is government, as you say. So all of these taxes that come in, it goes to flow through the underpinning of the government system in Washington. And then as long as that system is going, they will then go to the international bond market and say, hey, look at us, look at all these taxes, look at all this revenue we have coming in. This is going to keep going. So then they go to the bond market and say, he'd take out these T-bills, take out these loans, we're going to keep going, we're going to pay it forward, and that's how the government is then able to live beyond their means, which none of us would do in our private lives. But the minute you start turning down that revenue collection, the entire system collapses. So saying that you want to actually cut government or reduce government spending, it's kind of like going to Hollywood and saying that you want to shut down movies, right? Of course, you'd be run out of town on a rail if you did that. But that's it. That's the whole town. Everybody's business. Everybody knows someone in there that is running off of the lifeblood of that. So this is what creates the deep state, and this is what President Trump and the team are fighting day in, day out. It's an entire system that is deeply ingrained within the power structure of Washington, D.C. Although I would also add that when it comes to Democrats, their love for taxes and Tim Burchett's tweet there is real, as a matter of fact. And you have these Democrats out there like AOC, like Bernie Sanders, and others, and Elizabeth Warren, who's floated it, who they want to go a step further. They don't just want to tax; they actually want to confiscate the wealth in this country and then redistribute it. This, of course, is the basic underpinning of communism. And so there is another sliver, another level of Democrats where it goes beyond loving taxes. It goes this idea of thinking that government has the right to do whatever they want with wealth, no matter who generated it in this country. And so keep in mind, of course, their billionaires and their oligarchs will be totally exempt from all of this. But when it comes to anyone else who's successful, they'll complain about it all day long, but who are they going to come after? They're going to come after the small and medium business owners in this country. They're going to come after people who have a second house, people who have a vacation house or like an Airbnb, that type of thing. Those will be the people who absolutely get cracked down on. And why? Because those people are the biggest threat to the system.
Yeah. Wow. What's that saying? Socialism works until you run out of other people's money. And
Precisely.
you know, communism is working when everyone's equally miserable. And like that's what they want. I keep thinking, like, these are the major talking points. Like, government solves your problems. We need more tax money. Vote Democrat. Republicans, the government is the problem. We need to lower your taxes and stay out of your life. That's the Republican Party. I know that's very simplistic. But to me, as somebody that pays a lot in taxes, I can't even entertain the idea, because you can't tax your citizens into prosperity. It's impossible. It's like standing in a bucket and saying, lift yourself up. I can't. I'm in the bucket, right? Like the overtaxing your people. I think President Trump understands, as someone who pays a lot in taxes, that of course there has to be some money that comes in. Like, the military isn't free. Changing roads, repairing bridges, like all of that costs money. But when you find out just how much of it was being wasted on, USAID, how much fraud was in Social Security. By the way, I saw that they just removed a lot of people from Social Security, and it came to the tune of about $12 billion a month. Every single month, and they're like, we're not even done. We're like, we just started the removal process.
These are some of the biggest line items out there, because again, recurring payments, right? Just like I was talking about earlier, it's those recurring payments that pile up over time. And then, of course, when you're talking Social Security, you're making the recurring payments at scale. And of course, Elon has famously talked about this, where he said, well, who's checking to make sure that the people are still alive? And they say, well, they haven't canceled the payments yet, or we haven't got a signal to cancel the payments. And we know what's going on is that someone has passed away and someone is cashing the check, because the check's still coming in the mail, because the government is the stupid one. The government is the one that continues sending it out.
Yeah. This is gross, but this is a true story. There's a town west of Salt Lake City, Utah, called Tooele. And they literally found somebody's mother locked in a freezer. She had been there for almost 2 years. Why? He didn't want the Social Security checks to stop. So he never held a funeral. He never told anyone that she had died, because he didn't want those payments to stop flowing. Somebody's cashing these $12 billion worth of checks.
I keep going back to this, is that, it's something that I think conservatives would do well to internalize, that it's very simple. The Democrats understand this. People are incentivized by economics. People are incentivized by economics. If they know something, so as that might sound crazy to us, but to that person, it makes sense. Why? I need to keep the checks going. Mom would have wanted me to keep the checks going. She's not here anymore. Throw her in the freezer. Keep the checks coming. People are incentivized by economics, and you can use example after example, perhaps not as extreme as that one, but again, you will get if you want some kind of behavior, if you want a certain kind of behavior, then go ahead and subsidize it, and you will get as much of it as you possibly can. And so this is something that I would think conservatives need to really internalize, is that this idea that, we look at money as a like a symptom, or a potentially a precursor to something else that could go on out there, but it is also behavioral. And so if you want, for example, deportations as a completely other way to look at it, is you say, okay, deportations cost this much money in terms of the plane ticket, but how much more money will you have in your pocket when your wages go up, because you won't be competing with the cheap foreign labor from overseas, whether it's the H-1Bs or whether it's for a working class job. And so suddenly people are like, wait a minute, I wasn't even looking at it that way, or how much housing costs are going to come down, or how much gasoline costs or congestion are going to come down. Your commute's going to get better. Your education system will be better. Your healthcare system will be better. Why? Because we won't be massively over congested by the 10 million or 20 million extra people who aren't supposed to be here.
Yeah. No, it's when you start adding it up, these large line items, as you say, they become very, very expensive for America. You served in the military. It's the Russia-Ukraine war has been a top story for about 3 years. Now, Russia has done one of their biggest strikes on Kiev. President Trump saying, this isn't necessary. It's bad timing. Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get this peace deal done. President Trump has been put between a rock and a hard place because, on the one hand, Russia was baited into war by NATO continuing to push to the east. On the other hand, you've got Europe and Zelensky. They want this war to continue, but they want it to continue with American taxpayers funding the war. Are we gonna see the end of this? Because right now, to me, it seems like President Trump seems to be the only world leader that actually wants this war to come to an end.
Well, Stephen, I think that's exactly right, because there's two issues at play here. And I had the just incredible honor of being able to travel with Secretary Bessent to Kiev to present the first draft of the mineral deal to Vladimir Zelensky. And I was a fly on the wall in the presidential compound there when they had that first meeting. Of course, the media, lost all their minds. And, you take the train 10 hours in, 10 hours out, and you fly to Poland. And, there was actually a strike on Kiev the morning that we had arrived. This was a drone strike. I don't believe it included ballistic missiles. It wasn't as big as the one that took place last night. But it was a stark reminder to all of us that, we are traveling, in fact, in an active war zone. And I believe there's one ballistic missile that actually hit when we were there. And so what I remember hearing, though, was that Zelensky was not interested in the mineral deal. And we later found that out again when J.D. Vance met with him in Munich. Then, of course, to his own meeting within the Oval Office, which the entire world saw from there in real time. And so it's kind of this situation where Zelensky. There are two times where Zelensky will refuse a peace deal: when he's winning the war and when he's losing the war. And what do I mean by that? Well, if he's winning the war, then things are going well. Why would he want a peace deal? But of course, that's not the case. So if he's losing the war at the same time, he doesn't want a peace deal. Why? Because number one, that means he's going to have to say, we didn't do as well as we wanted. We've lost part of Ukraine. And then he has to go, and immediately, the minute that he ends wartime restrictions in Ukraine, the minute that he ends martial law, this will trigger presidential elections in Ukraine again. So his term ended almost a year ago in Ukraine, his presidential term. He was elected in 2019 to a 5-year term, which ended in 2024, May of 2024. And so he's only still in power by martial law. So the minute that the war ends or a peace treaty is signed, that would, of course, lead to the end of the martial law, which would then trigger elections. And so the question that I think a lot of people should be asking is, why won't Zelensky simply allow these elections to take place? Now, on the Russian side, of course, you also have a similar calculus. Russia has been the side that's gaining ground in areas in the Russian-speaking territories and provinces. Russia is the one that has completely pushed Ukraine out of Kirk at this point. That salient that we saw that Zelensky was hoping to use as a bargaining chip in the negotiations, well, that's part of territorial Russia. That's completely ended. So they're on the march right now, and Russia is gearing up for a massive summer offensive right now. And so the question, of course, I think on a lot of Russian leaders' minds, and Lavrov mentioned this before, is number one, why would we stop when we have the initiative? And then number two, if you make a deal with the Americans now, who's to say that Congress won't be overturned in 2 years and that the presidency won't be overturned in 4 years? They say we can make a deal with Trump, and sure, that's perfectly fine, but what happens when he's no longer in office? And so that's the perspective they're looking at it. Russia, of course, I think everyone knows famously doesn't exactly do term limits the way that we have in the United States. And so they're looking at it from a much longer term perspective than, quite frankly, anything that the current American administration can offer. And yes, it is President Trump who's doing as much as he can to say, we want this to stop. And honestly, I think it's going to get to a point where there's going to be a real political headache. I'm not going to say nightmare, but headache for the administration, because it's going to look like if the peace deal isn't locked in, and potentially Russia could come to terms, then there's going to be clamor for another aid package to Ukraine, and you're going to have a huge split, I think, in the conservative side, because there are some people who really want to support that, and there are some people who are just at the base who are just adamantly opposed to it.
Yeah. Well, Trump is the most pro-life president we've ever had, not only in the womb, but also in war. He doesn't want to see Ukrainians die. He doesn't want to see Russians die. He doesn't want to see Palestinians or Israelis or Iranians. He really is trying to have peace. At the same time, it is really hard to control other human beings. And I think he's doing the best that he can. But stop it, Vladimir, was his message today, and hopefully we can. But yeah, they're gearing up as if this agreement is not going to come to an end. And Zelensky, we'll see if he ends up signing that mineral rights agreement.
Well, and Stephen, I would just add that I think that what we need to be clear about, and what a lot of people need to be clear about, the United States is not a neutral third party. We are a party to the conflict itself. The New York Times has, and you mentioned how the reports have come out that the push east for NATO baited this entire war to happen under the Biden administration. Well, the New York Times even finally admitted, which I think we all understood what was going on, was that during the Biden administration, the whole war was being run out of a bunker on a U.S. Army base in Germany, that we were, in fact, the ones providing the targeting, providing the INW, the indications and warnings, providing the strike packages to the Ukrainians for some of these long-range missiles, for some of these long-range strikes that we were doing, particularly even ones that took place within mainland Russia and places like Kursk that I was talking about. So, it's not like the U.S. is some, independent observer here. We are actually the ones that have really been fueling this conflict. And I think that eventually the next step is that the Russians will probably say, we don't even want to talk to the Ukrainians. We want to talk directly to the Americans. So we'll see. May 9th is coming up. Of course, May 9th this is the 80th May 9th. This is the anniversary. It's their VE Day, so it's the end of World War II Day. They call it the Great Patriotic War in Russia, and this is the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. This is when, of course, Russia holds these massive parades in Red Square in front of the Kremlin, and Vladimir Putin is absolutely going to make this a May 9th to remember, and we'll see which way that shakes out.
Yeah, we will. 24 million Russians dead to get Hitler. So, Jack, thank you so much for coming on. If people want to follow you, what's the best place for me to send them?
Best place, Human Events Daily. We are up online on X every day. We're up on Rumble. We're up on YouTube. We're also now carried by Salem Radio Network nationwide in the 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern time slot.
Okay, great. I'll put those direct links down below as well as links to your books so that people can check those out. We'll have you back on.